Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Burnt Santee, joined today by Frances Carlson. Hi, Frances.
Hi, Heather. How are you?
I'm good, welcome. We've been, of
Thank
course,
you.
chatting before I hit record, so hopefully we can bring some of that in to this conversation too. But would you start by just telling folks about yourself? I'll tell you that I first learned about you with your Essential Touch book and your Big Body Play book, which I have really appreciated in my own work. But what else do you want, or what more do you want to say about that for folks?
Well, thank you for having me. First of all, I um, recently retired from a really long career in early childhood, a career that I fell into completely by accident straight out of college because I was in a small town in Oklahoma. And I saw an ad in the paper for a 3-year-old teacher, and I thought, how hard can that be? I've taught vacation Bible school. Let me go apply for that job. It'll give me
Yep.
some spending money till I find a real job. So
Real
I
job,
applied.
yep.
They saw on my application that I'd graduated from college and said, we have a center across town that needs a director. You have a college degree. Do you want that job? And I said, I don't know. Does it pay more? And they said, yes. And I said, sure. So at 20 years old, straight out of college, I was a director of a child care center, and my only experience with young children was having been one myself,
Hmm.
babysitting in high school and teaching vacation Bible school.
Yeah.
So I can't say I got off to an illustrious start, but I'm so fortunate that I had people along the way who really supported me and taught me well about what matters in early childhood. I did go on to get a master's in early childhood education, and the Essential Touch book that you referenced was actually my capstone topic in my master's program, where I contended that we could reduce aggression in young children with touch. I had a professor at that time that said, no, we know what causes aggression. It has nothing to do with physical contact. So at that point, I started on a mission to prove him wrong. And the result was what ended up being published as Essential
I love
Touch,
the book even more now.
which was like, I've worked with children so long. I know inside my core that this is a need and that children will do anything to get us to put their hands on them, and they still do. It's again, because it's a need. It's not a want. It's something we have to live, is all that human contact. So that was a highlight in my career. Essential Touch was like a fourth child to me. I do have 3 grown millennials, and Essential Touch was like my fourth baby. From that book, I became aware of how important rough body play is to getting your touch needs met, especially for boys, because after the age of 2, we really kind of frown at them if they hold hands or link arms or hug each other. Toddler boys do. Toddler boys don't care, but they start to figure out, like, oh, maybe we're not supposed to. Maybe I'm supposed to push you down, and they like being pushed down, so it works for them. But then I became really interested in all that rough play that we do. I know I did it as a child with my brother and our next door neighbor. Every single chance we got, we did it out in the yard in front of our parents. As soon as they left us alone in the house, we jumped on the beds because that was our favorite thing to do, is bed
Yeah.
jumping. And then once we had children, I said my kids are millennials, and they are. One of our boys, have twins who are almost 34, said to me last year, I never realized I had free range parents until I started talking to my friends who didn't grow up the way that we did.
Yeah.
And I said, well, we raised you the way that we were raised because we loved our childhoods. We wanted y'all to have the same childhoods. And he said, yeah, everybody was having the childhood we were having, but they weren't. And
Right.
I said, well, good for us that you had that childhood. And that means opportunities to be out of our sight once they were old enough, which is over the age of 5. They had some time that we didn't necessarily have our eyes on them. Not miles away, not neighborhoods away, but away from us. The
Yeah.
chance to take some chances, the chance to take some risks and find out what their capabilities were, which was, huge for me as a child, and we think huge for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking as you were talking, my children are similar ages, 32 and 30. And I can remember when they were toddlers, their dad like literally just picking them up and throwing them onto beds and big pillow fights that would knock them all over the bed. It was so
Right,
fun.
right.
Yeah. Well, I invited you because this might be the first episode we've done where the opening quote comes from a LinkedIn post. But I invited you. I
It
really wanted to
works.
have you talk more or hear you talk more about something you posted, I think maybe end of last year, November-ish, maybe. But you said since anxiety is a byproduct of an aversion to risk, and young children are suffering from increasing amounts of anxiety, does it not make sense that we intentionally plan for and cultivate a healthy amount of risk in their play, especially in their rowdy body play? We have to provide chances to climb up and down, jump off, swing around, navigate uneven surfaces, hang from a variety of acceptable heights. If children are not allowed risks to successfully navigate in their play, their anxiety is only going to continue to increase.
Yes.
So I'll tell you honestly, one of the reasons I wanted to, I mean, I just want to hear more about this, but I also want to use this conversation with my students who get so worried when I talk about risk because they have not yet learned to separate risk from hazard.
Right. Right.
And to talk about preschool children's mental health also really scares some, students and some people who just maybe haven't thought about how, that idea has never been introduced to them that
Right, right.
really young children can have mental health impacts we don't intend.
Well, and I will say, I'm not a mental health professional, so nothing I say comes from that background. I would never attempt to diagnose a child with anxiety or any kind of anxiety disorder because that's not my expertise. But from a child development standpoint, which is my background, it's your background, what we know is that from birth, we attempt to take physical risk. And a risk is different from a hazard. A hazard occurs when there's no planning, when there's no supervision. I'm not going to get a 9-month-old baby and leave them in the living room while I go outside and say, well, it's good for babies to have risk. That's not risk. That's a hazardous environment for a not yet mobile child to navigate without supervision. That would be abusive on my part. So I think that when people talk about risk, that's where they go to in their mind is an unmitigated hazard, the worst case. When I talk about climbing up on surfaces and jumping off, I don't mean the roof of a 2-story house. Even though my brother and I, when we were kids, were desperate to get up on the roof of our house.
Definitely been on some roofs in my
childhood. We climbed on the doghouse and jumped off. We climbed in trees and jumped off. We climbed in the neighbor's wall and jumped off. And there was the roof. But that would be a hazard. Our parents, of course, were good parents. They weren't going to let that happen. So the risks that we were able to navigate were ones that really benefited us. And my brother, who was 2 years older than me, was kind of my mentor and guide in all of this risky play. The first time I had to jump out of a tree, I was terrified. I wasn't sure I could do it. He had already jumped down, so I knew he could do it. He was okay, but I was scared. And I think that another kind of time that we get derailed in this conversation is thinking that because we feel fear or because a child feels fear, we should stop.
Okay.
There's a healthy amount of fear that spurs us on to prove that we can do it. And when we confront fear in an occurrence and then we navigate it successfully, that feels great. Like that feels so, look at me. Like I have a video of a friend of mine's daughter has a 2-year-old. She posts videos of him on Instagram all the time. And recently she has a video of him climbing up a structure, just a climbing structure on a playground to get to the top. And at about the 3rd rung, he's off the ground and he picks up his foot and he's scared because like, well, I'm off the ground. And so she reaches over, she scaffolds a little bit for him. She puts her hand on his bottom and then he gets his other leg up. He gets up, he gets up. He gets on the top and turns around. His smile is like here to here. You don't get that sense of self-affirmation if you don't take risk, because that's where it comes from. That's where that sense of, I was terrified and I did it anyway. And I did it. I did it. Look at me. I was able, he did it at 2, climbing that structure. I remember my daughter learning to ride a bike when she was 4 because her brothers could ride bikes, and she she couldn't get on the bike by herself. She had to stand on the step to jump on the bike.
Yeah.
She got on that bike and she started pedaling as fast as she could to keep it upright. And that pride, that huge sense of, look what I took on and did it. You
Uh-huh.
don't open that door any other way except through
Yeah.
risk.
Yeah. So, so how does that connect, excuse me, do you think to, because what you wrote on in that post is very logical. Like if this is true and this is true, then we can assume, that this may
Right,
be
right.
true. So what's the impact then, do you think when we frame the conversation around anxious feelings, even if it's not like a diagnosed anxiety, but just that a child who feels anxious about something, where does this "I did it" feeling fit in?
I think that one thing that as teachers or parents we can do, like if I had been with the 2-year-old climbing the climbing structure and I saw him hesitate on the 3rd rung,
Uh-huh.
I think the instinct is to say, whoa, 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 be careful. Well,
Mhm.
what does that do? That heightens the sense of anxiety that the child is probably already feeling.
Yeah.
So instead, maintaining a neutral face and a neutral voice and saying, hey, I see you hesitating. Do you feel too high off the ground now? Let me come support you so you feel safer so you can keep climbing.
Hmm.
You're
Hmm.
acknowledging the sense of anxiety. Of course, I feel anxious. You're off the ground. That feels
Yeah.
scary. It would feel scary to me to be off the ground.
Yeah.
Scarier even now than it did when I was 2 or 5. So acknowledging what that feeling is, that anxiety gets kind of a bad rap, like feeling anxious is a bad thing. It's these sustained senses of heightened anxiety that has become the problem, not feeling anxious. Of course, people feel anxious. Things that are unknown create anxiety. Climbing up that structure for the first time is going to feel scary. But acknowledging that feeling, being there again, because supervision to me is key. Anything we do that involves children's bodies has to be supervised by sight and sound. We're not going to put them on the climber and then go back to the car and watch cat videos for an
Uh,
hour because that's unsafe.
uh-huh.
The mother, Bria, did the perfect thing. She reached out and steadied him a little bit, gave him that physical support. I don't know if she said anything to him because I didn't have the volume on, but it was enough to get him over the hump that his anxiety caused and kept him going. So I think the way that we acknowledge children's anxiety by helping acknowledge the feeling, but not in a negative way. And our faces and our voice intonation give children all kinds of messages about whether we think it's okay to proceed or whether or not we think they need to stop. So the neutral face is very important. Oh, wow, you're slowing down. What can I do to help? As opposed to, oh, look at you. The
Yeah.
horrifying face that we often get, especially when
Yeah.
girls are involved in
I,
risk. But that's a whole
oh
other
yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. Well, we can get to the girls here in a sec, but I think it's about, are they learning the environment they're in can be trusted and is, you know, safe enough, I guess, too, because if we are constantly saying, be careful, get down, don't do that, that's not safe, no wonder they kind of just
Right,
walk around in a fog of worry sometimes, because that's exactly what we've taught them to do. Instead of, I'm going to help you learn to what you can trust and what, maybe what you should be legitimately careful about.
right,
And if you take a risk and it doesn't quite work out like you wanted to, I'm still here and it's still a safe environment. Like we can help them
right,
kind of recover from that.
right. By just not making such a big deal out of it. And I think, you're exactly right that be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful is a litany children grow up with today that was not the litany of my childhood. It was
Right.
not the litany. I remember once my daughter, and she was the daredevil. She's the youngest. She had 2 older brothers. She had no fear.
Mhm.
One day my mom was here. We were on the front porch and they were playing. She and the girl across the street were out in the street playing. She had on her rollerblades and the little girl across the street was pulling her with her bike. So Lindsay's riding the bike. There's a rope tied to her bike. Katie's holding the rope, skating on her rollerblades.
I have done that
Well,
on a
then she
skateboard.
got Lindsay's skateboard. She got on the skateboard with her rollerblades, and then Lindsay pulled her. And my mother's having a meltdown on the front porch. Why
Yeah.
aren't you making her stop? And I said, we're in a cul-de-sac. She has on knee pads, elbow pads, and a helmet.
Mhm.
I'm going to let her play.
Mhm.
And my mother wasn't happy with me for making that choice, but I thought we had provided enough planning and supervision to accommodate the risk that she wanted to take with her body. And she was fine. She realized it's hard to keep your balance when you're wearing rollerblades on a skateboard. She figured that out, but that was her choice. It was a
Yeah.
real kind of physics experiment for her to see what happens when you
Yeah.
have that much motion in your lower body. But she made that decision. We did not forbid her from taking that risk or shout out, be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful, because she was being careful.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I always, when I'm having conversations with people who are kind of working with young children and thinking, are new to thinking about risk as a positive thing, I just always say, if you're worried, just move closer. Like, if
Right.
you're worried, don't just
Yes.
stand across,
Yes.
even if you're standing across the playground, let's say, and you yell, get down, that's not safe. You're not keeping them safe. If you're really thinking it's safe, you run over there
You
and you
need to get
get you
closer.
get close to them. So I
Exactly.
also just wonder, is it
Exactly.
just because we have been conditioned to say it's unsafe, even though we kind of are still okay with it because we're not moving close to you. We're just
Right.
yelling
Right.
across the playground.
And I guess I would question, if you think that your environment is so patently unsafe, why are you allowing young children to navigate it? Don't you need to fix the environment before you
Yeah.
allow children to be in it? I mean,
Yeah.
that's just common sense, right? We wouldn't put
Yeah.
children in an environment. I wouldn't let 8-month-olds crawl around in a pre-K room because it's
Uh-huh.
not a safe environment. But I would hope the infant room I provide for them is a safe environment with surfaces to navigate, crawl up on, roll
Mhm.
off of if they need to, and they're not going to bang their head into a hard cabinet. They're going to just roll over onto the mat and
Yeah.
realize that's what happens when you move your body too far, you roll off.
How did
And
I get here?
and again, all of that risk that we should be accommodating with children, it gives them that feel good. Of course it does, because they've accomplished something physically. And I think that's one of the greatest feel goods you can get, is to accomplish something physically. But they're getting so much cognitive information about the world and how they navigate through it, and the
Mhm.
impact that their bodies have on the environment, on other children, how they navigate through space. Climbing up the ladder to the slide feels differently than climbing up the slide does. That
Mhm.
engages your core differently, it engages your brain differently. And if we say to them, I had a student once who just argued with me, and she said, but it's not safe to climb up the slide, it's too high. And I said, here's the slide.
Also, it's the same height as the top of the ladder.
Explained it to me. And she, I felt, and I realized that I was kind of embarrassing her. And
That wasn't very
I
nice
do
of me, but
sometimes get
yeah.
really smarmy and sarcastic. And I
Mhm.
backed off and I said, I'm sorry. I'm not picking on
Yeah.
you. I want you to see they're the same height from either
Yeah.
side.
Yeah.
And she said, well, there's nothing to hold on to if they're climbing the slide. I said, there's as much to hold on to as there is climbing up the ladder.
You're right. Yeah.
Think about it. Well, what if another child's coming down at the same time? And I said, that's a hazard. How do
Mhm.
we accommodate that? So,
Mhm.
yes, we're in agreement. Climbing the slide is risky, but good
Yeah.
for children. Climbing it while somebody else is sliding down could be hazardous.
Right.
We can plan for that. Well,
Mhm.
how would you do that? I said, well, I have an excellent pre-K teacher who lets the children vote every day before they go outside. Is it an upslide day or a downslide day? And they vote with unit blocks, and then she puts a magnet on the slide that lets them know. Are we going
Oh, yeah.
up? Are we going down?
Oh, that's a fun idea. Yeah, I think that's what an example for me of when I have seen that possibility and I'm near enough to the slide, and one wants to go up and one's trying to come down, then I can also help them kind of navigate that themselves. And then it's a
Right,
social experience too, in
right.
addition to the physical and the cognitive. But it
Right. Instead of
involves me
say,
being aware of what's happening and close
yeah,
enough to do that.
yes. Well,
Yeah.
I think the knee-jerk response is to shout while you're running over, saying, "Stop, stop, stop, you're about to get hurt."
Hmm.
Again, we've labeled, we've judged, we've terrified the children. Well, your
Hmm.
response makes so much more sense, not just in appropriateness, but in setting the tone for what we want for them. Wow, we have a problem here. How can we navigate this?
Yeah.
What can we
Yeah.
do?
Yeah. And they come up with
Again,
really good
3 and 4 year
on
olds
their
are
own.
more
Yeah.
capable, I think, than sometimes we remember. That
Yeah.
they're more capable physically. They don't topple over like weebles as many times as we think they're going to.
Yeah.
They don't just fall down. They're
Yeah.
pretty strong. They're pretty balanced. They
Yeah.
are great at acknowledging what the hazards could be. And I think that's because they were born to play this way. And the only way to sustain this type of play through their early childhood is to be really savvy at how to do it without causing harm. So
Right.
they know what to do. They need us to still help facilitate and prepare the environment for them to then do what they know how to do best.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to go in another direction and see what your thoughts are. You know what? I think one of the other ways that this can impact children's mental health, psychological well-being, whatever phrase we want to use, I think is when this kind of play gets labeled as misbehavior, and then the child is repeatedly getting this message that your thoughts are wrong, your instincts are wrong, what your body's telling you you need is wrong. And I think that can be really um, harmful, as much as that word scares people out of conversation sometimes. But
Yeah.
so what do you think about, I mean, what do we do to shift from not to shift to seeing it as a positive thing, a need,
Right.
developmentally informed to allow that kind of stuff?
There's a lot of different directions you could come at that from. I'm actually revising Big Body Play right now, and one of the
Ooh.
new chapters or additions to a chapter will be kind of framing big body play in the context of animal behavior, because risky body play is something all animals do from birth. It's not just human animals. Gibbons are out there. We mimic gibbons with monkey bars, but gibbons started it, not humans. That leaping, that tumbling, that animals that can roll themselves into balls so they can tumble down the hill. That's animal behavior. It's not just humans. So an acknowledgement that kind of we come hardwired to play this way should help teachers have some degree of comfort with it. But the guilt piece that you're talking about really hits home for me, because I think in some sense we are absolutely increasing their sense of anxiety about this being an unsafe way to play. If we're shutting it down, we're making them feel guilty about the fact that they want to play this way. And I think, would we tell children, yes, there's salmonella, there's food poisoning, there's things that can happen. Do we make children feel guilty about eating? We
Right.
don't. We accommodate
That's
their
great.
food to make sure it's safe and healthy, and then we say it's time to eat, have at it.
Yeah.
But this play style, Michelle Tannock, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, is a Canadian researcher,
Uh-huh.
did some research 10 or 15 years ago where she interviewed children. I believe they were school age. They may have been pre-K age, but I believe they were school age. Tannook, I believe is how she spells her last name. She interviewed children and asked them about their rough body play, and 100% responded that, yes, we play this way. And then 100% responded that their teachers don't allow it.
Oh, wow.
Well, what does that say to you? I'm born to have this really rowdy, risky, loud play style, born to do it, and my teachers tell me it's bad.
Mhm.
What does that feel like in the soul of that little child who's like, but I have to? Well, they do it anyway because, like
They
the
have
basketball
to.
professional said, we're compelled to do what we have been forbidden. So the more teachers say, no, you won't, then that natural risk that would have been productive in their play does become a hazard, because now they're having to do it covertly. Now they're having to do it when no one's looking, so that they can do it without being caught or shut down. So by trying to make them be safer, we're inadvertently making them be at greater danger. And, again, their anxiety levels that would have been kind of typical anxiety that makes you a little nervous but propels you forward
Yeah.
is now kind of unbridled because I don't know what I'm capable of. I'm scared of my own shadow. Every time I move, somebody says, be careful, watch out, sit down.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm not
Yeah.
sure that I'm capable of doing anything anymore. I'm just going to sit here and be afraid.
Yeah. And then we praise the sitting and see that as like school readiness. Yeah. So, okay, what about the girls that are sort of socialized out of this kind of play?
Another one of my kind of pet topics or loves is men in early childhood education, because the thing about men when they work with young children is they tend to support this play style more naturally than a lot of women do. And not to be stereotypical, I have a lot of
Right.
male colleague friends who are like, no, I do not
Yeah.
allow that in my room. And I have a lot of female colleagues who say, yeah, it's great. I do everything I can to support it. So I don't want to make a stereotype that says all
Right.
men support rowdy body play, because
Right.
that would not be true. But from
Or
statistical reasons, more
reinforce
of
the
them
gender
do than women.
binary.
They just do. And with
Yeah.
girls and boys, they are less likely to just be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful, like women do with boys, but more with girls. What's beautiful to me about men working with young children, especially young girl children, and all this rowdy body play, is it gives that young girl a chance to be praised by a male figure for something other than how cute she is, because she has
Okay.
no control over her hair or how she was dressed.
Mhm.
But how persistent she was. Look how fast you ran. Look how strong you are. Look how long you stuck with that task until you got to the top. Like, you go, girl.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So affirming to have that kind of message from women as well. But when they get it from men, my hope is that kind of builds a template for the rest of their life for what they expect in their relationships. If they are in a relationship with a man, is that men will notice those attributes, not just look how cute I am, look how pretty I am, look
Okay.
how great
Yeah.
I look, but look how
Yeah.
strong I am, look how able I am, look how persistent I am.
Yeah. I always think about when I was a center director several years ago, there was one dad who did a lot of pickup and he wanted to stay and play. And it was usually even on the playground when you'd think big body stuff would maybe be less worried about. It was about, it was the time they were outside and the women there, it was all women staff I had at that time. Uh, really got worked up about that and hated when he'd come pick it up because it got everybody so wound up and then they couldn't get him calmed down again. And I was like, but that should tell you something that the
Right.
children are gravitating to him and so looking forward to him coming in and playing in this way on the playground, even on the playground with them. Like,
Right.
but they were so worried about not being able to get them back into like a compliant state. That
What's
they
interesting
were
about
so
that, Heather, is
annoyed.
if you actually let children have enough of it, they will calm themselves down.
Yeah.
They often are not ready to calm down because
Yeah.
they need more. Why are you still
Yeah.
eating? Because
Yeah.
I'm not full yet. Why are you still drinking water? Because I'm still thirsty. Why are you
Yeah.
still running around screaming? Because I still need it. I didn't get enough yet.
Yeah.
And even though if they have been uber exuberant in their hearts, really, pounding, we should build in cool downs for them. We build in cool downs for ourselves as adults. If we've run, a marathon, which I'm not doing, but there are
I'll
people who
take your
do,
word for it.
they have cool downs for that. That we should cool children down. There are ways. My friend Matt, who's in New Zealand, he's brilliant. He works with young children. He just has the best kind of natural techniques. And he does a cool down with children called Don't Smash the Hot Glass, where he holds his arms out really wide. No, there,
Yeah.
and the children hold their arms out really wide, and then he counts to 3, and they bring their hands together as quickly as possible, but don't smash the hot glass.
Oh,
So he
wow.
counts to 3, 1, 2, 3, and then you hold it.
Uh-huh.
Well, if you do that enough times, and then he does it wider and slower. You do that 7 or 8 times, you chill.
Oh, wow.
You're ready then to do, I had
Mhm.
a person at NACY last year tell me that what she does, I talk about big body games, turning little finger plays into, big body games. And she
Okay.
does said one way she cools children down is to do Eensy Weensy Spider, but she does it with a very low voice and she does it very slowly so the children
Yeah.
through molasses. Excellent way to cool them down. So instead of forbidding the play because it riles them up, we want them riled up. We want their hearts pounding. That's good for us. Give them enough of it and then help them cool down.
Yeah.
Give them some built-in cool downs and then they'll be more calm. If you need, I mean, I'm a Bev Boz devotee. I think being calm is
Yes.
kind of overrated, but
Right. Yes.
there,
But if that's your goal and you're going to be annoyed with children for not doing it, let's have
right.
some strategies.
Then there needs to be a
Yeah.
way, there needs to be a way to do it. And
Yeah.
but I think the risk element is what is keeping people away from the kind of play that children gravitate towards because, fear of litigation, it's a thing,
Mhm.
it's out there, it's
Yeah.
real, it's the elephant in the room. But when I was a center director, I always involved families. We had very shared, collaborative. I was not the boss up here in the ivory tower who told everybody what to do. The
Yeah.
staff and the families, and we worked together. We had a common goal for what we wanted to accomplish in that center. And we acknowledged kind of what we wanted and how to get there. And then we all worked towards it, which to me is how you reach excellence in group
Right.
care. It's a real
Yeah.
collaborative kind of shared governance, shared um, view. And in those conversations, people get a chance to voice what their fears are. They get a chance to say, I'm afraid for my child to climb all the way up there. And
Yeah.
then maybe we go outside and climb up there to see what it feels like.
Oh, that's a great idea. I do think that so much of our worry about risky play in general, but risky play requires that we really think about how we played. And not everybody has that rich, playful childhood or the space to engage in this kind of play, but a lot of us probably did more of it than we are remembering. And
Right,
um it's just so easy for adults to be disconnected from what it's like to be a really young child,
right.
because we don't explore the way in the world in that way anymore, and we don't have that need anymore, or we've learned to really skillfully ignore that need for movement in the case of this podcast host. So we forget that it's really important for children
Right.
because it doesn't fit our adult lens, or it's hard to see through our adult lens.
I also think, I mean, I feel this in my own body. My husband and I were camping week before last. We camp a lot, and we were in
Uh-huh.
South Georgia, which has all the live oaks dripping with Spanish moss. It was beautiful. And a couple of those live oaks, if he'd given me a leg up, I could have been up in that tree.
Yeah.
But, at 63, I'm a little more hesitant about tree climbing than I even was at 53, where
Mm.
I would have been in that tree. I would have been out on that limb saying, take pictures of me in this tree.
Yeah.
Our kids won't believe it. But I think that as we either never developed a sense of body confidence or because of age or some kind of, incapacity, no longer
Mhm.
trust our body confidence, we impose all of that on children and
Uh-huh.
think, well, I would feel unsafe doing that. So I would fall over if I did that. I would fall
Yeah,
down
yeah.
if I did that. So I'm not going to let them
Mhm.
do that. When,
Yeah.
again, in reality, children are so much more physically capable and competent that if you just move closer and watch and make sure that if they are jumping on boulders and they fall off, the ground cover underneath is sufficient to absorb that impact,
Mhm.
let them jump and see what happens.
Yeah.
I had boulders on a playground for years, and we were having some kind of legislative spotlight. I don't remember what. Anyway, a state senator was there and he knew that I was the lab coordinator. This was at a lab school. He
Mhm.
pulled me over kind of to the side and he said, there are boulders out here. I said, there are. I'm so glad you noticed them. Let me tell you how we use them on the playground. Children can get between them and kind of hide. They can crawl between them. They can leap from boulder to boulder. They can slither across one to the next.
Uh-huh.
He looked at me like I was a unicorn. And then he went over to somebody else and said, excuse me, there are boulders on the playground.
Somebody
You know, we had
Oh man.
children play on that playground for 3 solid years without there ever being an incident involving the boulders on the playground. And these were
Mhm.
2 through 5 year olds. They
Mhm.
navigated those boulders just
And
fine.
had the time of their lives,
They
probably.
did.
Yeah,
They,
yeah.
they did. And again, that it's a risk involved. Yes, you can
Mm.
just play hopscotch and jump. And for a toddler, that's appropriate. I wouldn't put an 18-month-old up on those boulders and
Right. Well, we
say,
shouldn't put them up where they can't get
right. But if they can
themselves,
climb up
right?
themselves, they're
Yeah.
probably ready to try
Yeah.
it out and see what
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
And if they fall, they're falling from an appropriate height onto sufficient ground cover to
Uh-huh.
absorb that shock. That's how we accommodate the risk that they want to take and that they need to
Yeah.
take.
So what about, I think, because I'm thinking of all the objections that have come up in my conversations with people, and I've done this myself. Sometimes I've stopped it because I don't want to have the conversation with the parent who worried. Like on that day, I'm just like, I don't have the energy to talk to mom about why we let them climb this high, so I'm not going to let them climb this high
Right, right.
sometimes. Or we worry, if there's an injury, then I have to face mom. So what about those conversations with families? I mean, of course, I think it's really important to always develop your relationships so that these conversations are natural and comfortable, and also
Right.
to be upfront from the beginning, here's our philosophy. But what about the teacher, the child care provider who's worried about having to have a conversation with a child's family who doesn't get it?
I mean, I think it's a valid fear because the person feels that way. And
Right,
any
right,
way
right,
you
right.
feel is valid because I don't necessarily feel that way, but I'm not going to say you don't have the right to feel that way because you
Uh-huh.
do.
Yeah.
Um, I was the same way as a center director. I tried to build those relationships daily so that if I had to have a difficult conversation, it was one of 30 conversations that had been very positive, and now I'm going to have one that's not maybe as
Yeah.
positive. I think that good risk management involves that level of communication all the time and
Uh-huh.
complete disclosure about what's happening
Right.
in the center, which I always did with images, images of men working with children. I would have parents come in and say, why is there a man in that room?
Oh
Oh, we
yeah, me
encourage
too. Yeah.
men to work here. We offer the
Uh-huh.
same screening, training, and oversight for everybody in the center. We don't discriminate against someone because he's a male. This is how we hire. This is how we screen. This is how we train. This is how we provide oversight so that they, kind of expect it. And I had somebody say to me recently, so if you have images of children like swinging on hoops with their feet off the ground, and that keeps a parent from enrolling in your center, what do you do? I said, I don't
Enroll
do
a different
anything. That
family.
was their right.
Hmm.
That was their
Right.
right to not come to that program. The same with Touch. I remember Carol Koppel,
Yeah.
who was my editor when I wrote Essential Touch. We were having that conversation about Touch and the program and being fully transparent about it, which I believe in. And she said, and how would you handle then a family who said, I want to enroll my child here, but you're not going to be allowed to have physical contact with my child? And I would say, you shouldn't bring your child to this program.
Hmm. Yeah.
But this is the risk you're also facing by not wanting anybody to have appropriate physical contact with your
Right.
child. You have to
Right.
get both sides of the picture. Yes, we want your child to climb up to this height. This is why. And then
Hmm.
how do we document it? I've been a fan of documentation panels for 30 years. How do we make learning visible? How do we translate what happened to those state standards, to that accountability, to that how do we measure learning, the problem solving that goes on, having a child navigate, how are you going to get your foot up to the next rung? Tell me, what's your problem solving process? And sometimes the child will say, I'm too scared, I'm getting down.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
And then I would
Yeah.
document that. So when they try again a few days later, I have that as benchmark. And then I have how much higher they went, until they solved that
Yeah.
problem. That's learning.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Can we, I'm looking at the clock. But can I ask for you to talk just a little bit more about, because you've touched on it throughout, the importance of physical touch and how that factors in to why kind of rough and tumble play is so important, so that people really, so no one is like, "Ooh, I can't believe she said that." Like, let's just clarify, what do you mean?
You know, it's funny because for the years that I would present following Essential Touches publication, I got really in the habit in the United States of talking about positive physical contact. And I was
Playing that
once
word game.
in Honolulu at a summit with a gentleman from Australia who's named Craig. And Craig said, "You're starting to freak me out. Why do you call it that? Why don't you just call it touch?" Because in my country, in my
Yeah.
culture, touch has a really negative connotation. But in reality, you know, what do we know about touch? Skin is the only sense fully developed at birth. What does that tell us? What does
Yeah.
that tell us?
Yep.
Infants are the most craveable, touchable. Put one up in my neck and let me just smother it because I want to feel that baby. Why? Why do you think they're that way? Because they need their skin to be touched and stroked. Is that every baby all the time, every time? No. I had twins. One who would just have wanted to be back in utero if he could have figured out how. He really craved a lot of skin to skin contact, and he got a lot of it. His twin brother wanted about 12 seconds of it. And then he was, as soon as he could push up, that's what he did, is push away, like put me down. He wanted to be more mobile. He wanted to be more physically active than his brother, who craved more physical contact. So individually, does it change what children need? Absolutely. And in this big body play, you see that manifested in whether or not they like to jump off of objects and roll on yoga balls, or whether they like to wrestle. Because
Yeah.
wrestling's just a big hug, rolling around on the ground. That's all wrestling really is.
Mhm.
Which is why it meets so much of that physical contact, that touch need, is because my hands are all over you and your hands are all over me, and we're rolling around and I'm getting a lot of skin to skin contact, and it's good for me. It helps with my serotonin. It helps with my dopamine. It helps level out all of my hormones, my cortisol that was really heightened by having to sit all morning while somebody droned on and on about shapes. And now I'm getting to be outside and I'm feeling better about myself. That's where all that calmness kind of comes from.
Yeah.
It's all of your hormones being regulated appropriately, and touch is a huge part of that hormone regulation.
Yeah.
Which is why
I
massage is so good. People say, "Oh, I felt so great after that massage." Of course you did, because everything now is level, uh, appropriately level for you to feel calm and kind of
yeah.
chill.
Yeah. And I think like infant massage became so trendy, and I think it was another way just to be euphemistic about essential touch, like you were with your positive physical contact or whatever.
Right,
Suddenly
right,
it was okay because it was massage, not touch, and it was like a training you could buy, so it must be valuable. Rather than just saying, "Look, children, we all need to some
right,
level
right.
some of that." Yeah.
It's interesting to me. When I don't present as much on essential touch as I used to. The book's 20 years old. It's out of print.
Yeah.
We're worse now since COVID with, I think if any modicum of progress we had shown towards having more physical contact with children, COVID blew completely out of the water. And now we're just like, you stay over there and I'll stay over here.
Yeah.
Um, what was I saying? I lost my train of thought. I used to do that in class, and I would say, "What was I saying?" And somebody who
I
takes
do that
copious
on this
notes would
show all
tell
the
me
time, and there are people who listen just to see
what I was just
my train of thought.
saying that I used to measure every year. I would go to the World Health Organization and get the homicide statistics that you can get country by country. And I would look at France, the UK, Germany, Japan, and the US very strategically, because Japan, infants spend the majority of their first year in skin to skin contact with someone. In England, there's a lot more peer-to-peer massage in their schools. In Germany, even though they focus on independence at about the same level as we do in the US, they don't see physical contact as a detriment to becoming independent. In
Mhm.
our culture, we tend to like put that baby down, push that. I had somebody tell me
Yeah.
once when I was holding my very touch-driven child, he needs to practice walking. I said, "You're hilarious. He knows how to walk. He wants to be held." Like, I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah.
He
Oh my
doesn't need to
gosh.
practice walking. Like, what's wrong with you? But anyway, if you go and look for those homicide statistics, which I just did, I should have pulled them up. So I'm going to quote from memory. This is not exact. But for 2022, most of those countries, the UK and France, which is a high contact, France has like 22 times more physical contact per minute than our culture does. We're a very low touch culture. The homicide rates in those other four countries, France, the UK, Germany, and Japan, are like less than one. They're like 0.17 or 0.1. They're low.
Mhm.
Ours is 6 per 100,000. Those countries with more touch, and somebody will always say, well, yes, but there's gun control.
Mhm.
There is gun control, but you can kill somebody without a gun if you want to. The
Yeah.
impetus to commit that act is 6 times higher in our country than it is in countries where, by my reasoning, people are getting a lot of their touch needs met, which what? Lowers cortisol, increases your well-being. It leads to connectedness. It's really hard to stay angry with somebody that you have that kind of physical bond with.
Uh-huh.
It connects us in a way that words don't.
Okay.
And when
Yeah.
we are unwilling to give it to children, they sense that from us and they feel that disconnection and that heightened sense of lack of attachment, for lack of a
Yeah.
better word. It doesn't
Right.
feel like a safe environment. It doesn't feel
Right.
like a
Like
safe
who
place. It
will
doesn't feel
help me
like I'm
when I have
wanted
a
here.
need? Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm reminded of, and maybe this is a good way to wrap the conversation up because you mentioned Bev Boss and you've mentioned Joy. And one of my favorite articles was when
Mhm.
she wrote for Exchange in the 90s called Joy in Early Childhood Programs. And the first, like one of the
Yeah,
first lines is, it's not a word you hear a lot in these conversations. And every child deserves a hallelujah kind of childhood. And I think about the
right,
kinds of
right,
play that you're talking about here and how often you can see the joy when children are climbing and jumping and
right.
wrestling around or chasing and all that, the things we
Which
worry
to
about.
me, I think, from an accountability standpoint and as early childhood educators, we all acknowledge that accountability to standards. So
Yeah.
from a cognitive development standpoint, this play is very productive. Children who rough play with their bodies more often are smarter than kids who don't. That's just kind of an all-encompassing
Yeah. Yeah.
statement, but it
Yeah.
generally is true. Um, Healthier, yes, more physical exertion, more socially adept, yes, because a lot of this play is not verbal, it's very nonverbal, and it's our nonverbal communication that gets the message across better than our words do. But I agree with you. At the end of the day, children don't play this way because they're getting, yes, let me start over. They are playing this way because they're getting smarter. Their brains are
Yeah.
telling them to, but their motivation to keep doing it is because it's just so much fun.
Right.
I
Yeah.
didn't jump off the doghouse for an hour and a half in a hot Georgia summer because I was thinking this is going to make me cognitively able to have a productive career when I'm grown. Did it because it was fun. It was just
Right.
fun, and if
Right.
you jumped further out, it was another risk. If you took a
Right.
running jump, it was another kind of way to increase the risk. And it just, it felt good. It was just a lot of, yes, Bev
Yeah.
Boss has been my
Yeah.
hero since I saw her at NAUIC like in 1990
Oh,
here in
wow.
Atlanta, 89, maybe. It was a long time ago.
Uh-huh.
And I was just, I was just hers from that moment because that should be at the core of what we do for children. We are meeting children will meet standards if we provide the opportunities for them to do what they were meant to do, because that's what helps their brains to grow. And then if we're paying attention, we can quantify those skills and label it as whatever and feel good about that.
Yeah.
Children know what they need. We
Yep.
need to trust them.
Yep. 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 But there's so many voices telling us not to trust them or that we're not enough if we're trusting children. And
Right.
it's it's really sort of a vicious cycle, but conversations like this, I think, give people language and courage and connection to other people who think the same way they're sort of thinking, but feeling
Right.
really isolated about. And so I think that um, they're gonna get a lot from having heard you go through all
Good.
this, and I really appreciate you being here for that.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Spent my whole career trying to help as many children as possible have a happy childhood. I had a
Mhm.
very happy childhood full of outdoor play, and I think my three did as well. And I think children deserve that, the
Yeah.
chance to have the happiest childhood possible. That's our mandate, is
Right.
to help provide
Yes.
that for kids. So,
Yeah. Yeah. It's just a bonus that doing that also allows them to, have the academic success or whatever
right,
a lot
right.
of
Be really
times that
smart
we're
and
looking
capable and get along well with others. And
for.
it
Yeah.
does. And I think that's why all of us were born to play this way from birth. It's not a
Yeah.
learned behavior. We know to do it intrinsically.
Yeah.
And why? What are the
Yeah.
other things we know how to do without being taught? Eat, sleep, eliminate,
Yeah. It's such a good connection.
and roll our bodies around in crazy loud. I know when my kids were little, they used to run up and down the stairs in our house just whooping and hollering. And one day my mother-in-law was over here and she turned to my husband and said, "Why do y'all let them do that?" And he said, "Why would we not?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Why would we not?
Yeah.
It's good for them, but it's also full of joy." So I
Yeah.
love that you
Yeah.
brought that up because,
And there's our mantra. Why would we not?
why would we not?
We can take that. All right. Well, thank you very much
Thank
again
you
for
so
being
much. It was
here.
great to spend the morning with you.
Yeah, yeah, I loved it. I love the conversation. And thanks everybody who's listening for listening to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd.